Welcome back. So often you'll hear of issues around how police abuse their power. We see this all the time, how officers sometimes use physical violence against people and how officers sometimes just don't seem to care. It was confirmed by the website Viewfinder last year that over an 8-year period, police in KwaZulu-Natal had killed over 1,000 people. Only 9 police officers have actually been disciplined for the deaths of 1,000 people. Melusi Ncala from Corruption Watch has been looking at this issue. Melusi, good afternoon to you. You've been writing about this. And one of the questions you ask is, why do police officers do this? Why do you think this is happening? Why do you think officers, I mean, they're ordinary people in a police uniform, are abusing people so often?
Good afternoon, Steve, and thank you for having us to talk about this all-important topic. Yeah, in the piece that I wrote, which was principally based on a podcast that we just released for information on policing and also just understanding the context and the dynamics within the police sector. You know, it's a question that I pondered on because I was having a discussion with various experts and activists, understanding the nature of policing. And it all, for me at least, based on my upbringing as well and witnessing some of these atrocities, I can't help feel that, you know, it's largely based on how the police have been institutionalized in the South African context and perhaps arguably in other places as well across the world. But in particular, you know, we need to look at the relationship that police officers have had with society at large, and in particular poor communities, black communities, where we found them to be extremely violent. And this is a culture that emanates pre-94, where the police was predominantly used to reinforce apartheid laws and to reinforce colonial laws. So it comes with no surprise then that if, you know, we're not really going to deal with the mental issues or psychological issues, then, you know, this is the kind of attitude that the police are going to have, despite the fact that they also emanate from these communities. It's not like these police officers are far removed from what's happening in the communities. They live in these communities, they see what's happening, and they're the very same brothers and sisters of the very same people that they abuse.
I mean, there's so many different aspects to it. I'm not a police officer, and I'd never want to be, because I think it's a very, very tough job, and a job that does expose you to violence. And is that maybe the problem? I mean, Melusi, for years, we've known that a young person will get arrested for, say, shoplifting. They'll go to prison. They'll, you know, spend 6 months in prison. They come out, and I'm talking primarily around men, they come out as sort of hardened criminals. They come out used to violence. It becomes normalized for them. Are our police officers having the same thing? A young person, age of 21 maybe, just done 2 or 3 years at the police college. They become a police officer. Within 2 years, they're exposed to massive levels of violence. They see their commanding officers turning a blind eye to it. They see this is how you get things done. This is how you get a confession. This is how you get rid of someone, whatever it is. And is that what's happening? I mean, almost the same thing that happens to people in a prison. It's actually happening to people in our police service.
Yeah, I mean, it's a paradigm that we need to look at the police from. The fact that, you know, well, some people at least argue, and this is a point that we made in this podcast as well, that there should be a human rights framework from which the police operate from. In other words, police should have a deep understanding of the socioeconomic rights of the society that they receive, that they serve in. But also, more importantly, in South African context, you would expect them to understand history and the context in which they operate. And so I wouldn't say that analogy is far-fetched with that you've just outlined right now, Stephen, in the sense that, you know, just like similarly to a criminal, police officers, based on the system of patronage, based on the corrupt system that is, and the gross abuse of power that we find within police, that is how they get introduced into the work that they do. This does not, of course, mean that all of the police are bad inherently. It's more of a systemic institutional issue that we have. There's no way, for example, in the last 10 years or so, where we have tens of thousands of reports reported to IPED, for example, and these all relate to issues of murder and rape and so forth. So it tells you that on some level, the police are not being schooled on what it means to be a servant of the people. They see themselves as the vanguard of the state, or perhaps, or even the elite in some instances, or some brotherhood.
Is there another issue? I mean, you mentioned the fact that police officers come from communities, and even if they're policing a community they don't come from, which is probably most of the time, you'd get to know it. You know who sells coffee at night. You know where to get a pie. You know that at sort of between 2 and 3 in the afternoon, if you're patrolling, say, the area around Soweto, you will see thousands of school children walking home. So you'll know the rhythms. And if you're walking as a police officer, you'll be in your police uniform, you'll have your firearm, but if you're walking around, people will know you. You'll get to know people. You know, things happen. If you're in a car with your partner, if you're in a police van, I don't know if you have the same exposure to a community, let me put it that way.
I mean, Stephen, when you say this, it actually makes me think of a whistleblower account that I had to read through some years ago, initially when I started work at Corruption Watch. And it was based on how some of the police officers, or at least the Metro Police in this particular instance, get introduced or in the induction into the work that they do. So in this particular instance, if you just allow me a quick few seconds, what happened is this an officer was told by senior officers, it just started, that, okay, we will give you lunch and so on. And this happened for a couple of weeks. And it happened to be in the middle of the week, the month, and then they told the officer, the senior officers then told the officer, oh no, please note that it's your turn today to buy lunch. And he said, well, I don't have money. Well, I said, well, make a plan. How do you think we've been doing it? So, you know, it's those little things that we need to realize of how things happen. It does not mean that the police are not in tune of what's happening in communities. They well are, especially the constables that roam our streets, supposedly protecting us, but they know very well that, you know, as they patrol, as they conduct roadblock searches and so on and so forth, what kind of people they're actually serving, and they know why they do. There's a reason why, for example, in the inner city of Johannesburg, you find predominantly roadblocks versus the outskirts or the suburban areas of Johannesburg. Those factors tell you something, that they know what kind of behaviors to expect in a certain segment of society.
Melusi Ncala from Corruption Watch, thank you very much indeed. Such an important conversation.